An elderly man never received visitors until a nurse came in and said, "You remember me, don't you?" But what he didn't know was that his gesture years ago would leave him in shock. Garrett O'Connell, at 84 years old, had spent his life in the quiet routine of a nursing home, waking that summer afternoon with a restlessness that felt different. He ran his trembling hand over the thin blanket and cast his gaze toward the window, where the yellowed curtains danced in the warm breeze. The scent of wildflowers permeated the room, poignantly reminding him of days when he still held hopes for a bright future. Now, his memories were reduced to disconnected fragments: the premature loss of his wife, the son who had left and never returned, and the darkness that had settled in his heart. The nursing home had an antiseptic atmosphere that unsettled him. With every corridor, the smell of disinfectant and the clattering of medical utensils seemed to echo the loneliness of its residents. Busy nurses came and went, conversing with one another in a professional tone, paying little attention to Garrett. He had resigned himself to the idea that he was forgotten, accepting solitude as a faithful companion. He believed that no one in the world remembered him anymore, and over time he had grown accustomed to being just a name on a list of patients. However, that afternoon, something in the air alerted him that the monotonous course of his days would soon be disrupted. He struggled to rise from his wheelchair, leaning on the bedside table, and adjusted his glasses to get a better look down the hallway. In a fleeting glance, he spotted a female figure who did not resemble the usual nurses. She walked with purpose, but there was no weariness etched on her face. Suddenly, the door swung open unceremoniously, and before him stood Rosalind Carter, a young woman in a white lab coat with a sweet yet determined gaze. "Good afternoon, Mr. O'Connell," she began, her voice tender yet anxious. "My name is Rosalind. I apologize for coming in like this, but I needed to see you before my shift ended." Garrett observed her with curiosity. It was rare for someone to address him by his full surname, instead of merely calling him Mr. O'Connell or Gramps, as the younger ones often did. She offered a warm smile, one that also hinted at something urgent she needed to express. "Is something wrong?" he asked, unsure whether to feel apprehensive or hopeful. Rosalind took a few steps closer and pulled up a chair to sit beside him. Her hands trembled in her lap, as if she had rehearsed for days what she was about to say. Then she took Garrett's hand and firmly asked, "You remember me, don't you?" The question rang out like a shot in the silence of the room. Garrett furrowed his brow, sifting through his memory but finding no trace that connected him to this young woman. Her eyes, glistening, pleaded for a recognition that did not come. "I'm sorry, but I really don't know who you are." She took a deep breath, fighting against the emotion threatening to spill over. "I feared that answer, but it's okay. I expected you might have forgotten." The elderly man felt a pang in his chest. Forgetting something important always left him distressed, as if he were guilty for letting slip away moments that could define who he was. "Well, Mr. O'Connell," she continued, "many people don't know this, but years ago you did something that completely changed my life. You saved me." He leaned back in his chair, surprised. How so?" "I can't explain everything right now, but know that if it weren't for your action, I might not be here today." At that moment, the sound of firm footsteps approached in the hallway. Dr. McAllister, the chief physician of the nursing home, appeared in the doorway with his customary stern expression, clearly disapproving. "Rosalind, your shift ended over half an hour ago. You're not allowed to have extended visits like this, especially not talking to the patient in that manner without authorization." The nurse stood up, pressing her lips together. She seemed ready to argue, but held back. Instead, she shot Garrett a protective glance, as if apologizing for having to leave. "I'm sorry, doctor, I was just on my way out. I only wanted to check if he needed anything." McAllister made a brief gesture, signaling her to leave. Then he cast a quick glance at Garrett, oscillating between respect for his advanced age and the impatience of someone who does not want to see the rules broken. "Is everything all right here, Mr. O'Connell?" he asked, showing no real sympathy. Garrett, still dazed, merely nodded his head. He couldn't find the words to convey the whirlwind of emotions that had formed within him. How could he express the confusion that conversation had caused? McAllister turned to leave, but Rosalind paused at the door and in a low voice whispered to Garrett, "Don't worry, I'll be back. When I return, I'll show you that your past isn't as distant as you think." With that, she exited, accompanied by the doctor, leaving the room once again steeped in silence. Garrett noticed his heart racing. The thought that he might have been responsible for something so significant as to save someone felt implausible, especially since in his old age he considered himself a failure, unable to keep even his own family together. He leaned back in the armchair, trying to regain his serenity. He focused on the shadows cast on the wall by the setting sun, elongating his frail figure in a fragile outline. He thought of the day his wife passed away, leaving him alone to raise their son. He also recalled the moment when his son, now grown, walked out the door, announcing he could no longer endure the miserable life they led. Since then, Garrett had never known if he was still remembered. The mere idea that he could have done something positive for someone unsettled him. Could it be true, or was it some mistake on Rosalind's part? Perhaps she was confusing him with another old man. But at the same time, there was a conviction in that young woman's gaze that did not feel like a fantasy. He stood up unsteady and approached the window. The light of the setting sun washed over his face, seemingly warming something long dormant within him. "If I did something so important," he murmured, "why can't I remember?" Night fell with its purplish hues, and after taking his medication, Garrett made his way to bed. Though tired, his thoughts kept him awake. He wanted to understand what Rosalind saw in him. He needed to discover the reason for her visit and why Dr. McAllister had shown such disapproval. Who, after all, would care to hide facts from a lonely old man? As he sank his head into the pillow, his half-closed eyes tried to piece together some forgotten detail. He vaguely recalled a distant occasion when he felt an urge to donate something valuable, even though he had little. Could this be what the nurse was referring to? But at the time, he had never known the precise fate of that donation. Perhaps it was just coins tossed into some charitable campaign. Exhausted, he eventually fell asleep amid the questions. He dreamed of illuminated corridors, unfamiliar faces, and echoes of voices calling his name. In his reverie, he saw a small beam of light guiding him down a narrow path, as if inviting him to uncover a hidden truth. He reached out, but everything dissolved the moment he awoke. The rising sun flooded the room, and as Garrett opened his eyes, he sensed that something much larger was at stake. Perhaps it was not too late to reclaim himself, to understand the consequences of his actions. If that nurse returned with proof, what kind of past would emerge and how deeply would it shake him? Still weary, he struggled to his feet, leaning against the wall. He stared at the closed door and let out a sigh. For some reason, he believed that Rosalind's visit was just the prelude to a change. And deep down, a flicker of hope told him that perhaps this new beginning could bring back something he thought was lost forever. Garrett awoke with the first ray of sunlight streaming through the cracks in the curtain. He still felt the unease in his chest from his encounter with Rosalind the night before. "You saved me," she had said, claiming that his past held an act of kindness whose magnitude went beyond what he could remember. Without wasting time, he got up, leaning on his cane, determined to uncover more details about that story that threatened to tear the veil of forgetfulness covering his memories. In the hallway, he encountered other residents who, as usual, were leaving the cafeteria, heading toward the garden or the common rooms. Some greeted him with a shy wave. Others barely noticed his presence. Garrett hesitated before approaching Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman with white hair who spent most of her day chatting with anyone willing to listen to her stories. "Good morning, Mrs. Patterson. Did you happen to see a new nurse yesterday afternoon?" He started, trying to sound casual. She blinked, looking confused. "New nurse? I saw someone in a light coat, but I can't remember the name. Are you all right, dear? You look a bit worried." "I'm fine, thank you. Just curious," Garrett replied, forcing a smile. He realized he wouldn't get much from her and moved on to the nursing station, where he spotted Miss Holloway checking patient files. The nurse, a middle-aged woman, looked up when she sensed Garrett's approach. Although she was always polite, she seemed too busy for a lengthy conversation. Still, she put down the paperwork and greeted him. "Mr. O'Connell, do you need anything?" He cleared his throat, slightly embarrassed to confess his search. "Do you know if Nurse Rosalind is on duty today? I haven't seen her around." "Rosalind Carter. She just arrived a little while ago. I know she's dedicated, but also quite discreet. I don't see her socialize much with the colleagues. If you want to talk, she might show up at lunchtime, as she's responsible for administering medications to some residents, including you." Garrett nodded, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. "All right. Thank you, Miss Holloway. I'm just trying to understand why she seemed so interested in me yesterday." Noticing the tone in Garrett's voice, Holloway narrowed her eyes. "Did she visit you outside of her schedule?" "Well, just for a few minutes, but she seemed to have something important to tell me." The nurse frowned as if holding some suspicion. "If you find out anything, let me know, okay? Dr. McAllister doesn't like hallway conversations, and Rosalind was transferred from another place I don't know well. But so far, she's shown dedication to the patients." Garrett thanked her and moved on, reflecting on what he felt. Although still confused, he was sure there was something bigger happening. A part of him wanted to unravel that mystery quickly. Another part feared reopening old wounds, as he vaguely remembered a time of great pain after his wife's death, when he believed nothing made sense anymore. Just before lunch, he settled on the porch of the nursing home, where a gentle breeze carried the scent of the rose bushes in the garden. With each second, his heart raced, waiting for Rosalind's arrival. When he finally spotted her crossing the courtyard in her pristine coat, he felt a shiver run down his spine. She walked toward him with determination in her eyes. "Mr. O'Connell, can I talk to you now?" she asked, checking a chart in her hands. He tried to mask his anxiety and gestured for her to sit in the chair next to him. "Of course, feel free." Rosalind took a deep breath, as if carrying a great weight on her shoulders. "I know it might be hard to believe, but decades ago you donated almost everything you had to a fund that helped sick and underprivileged children. I was one of those children." Garrett leaned in to listen better, his heart racing. "I remember there was a time when, well, I was left with almost nothing, but I never imagined my donation would be so significant." She nodded, her eyes shining with emotion. "If it weren't for that money, I would probably have died waiting in line at a public hospital without care. I always tried to find out who the anonymous donor was, but only recently found clues that led me to your name." He felt his legs tremble and leaned on the arms of the chair. "But why did no one ever tell me? I always thought that money was just a drop in the ocean of problems." Before Rosalind could respond, they heard hurried footsteps behind them. Dr. McAllister appeared, his expression stern. "I see you're still insisting on this story, Rosalind. I told you it's not appropriate to burden Mr. O'Connell with matters that may disturb him." She turned to face him, her tone firm. "Doctor, I'm not disturbing anyone. I'm just revealing an important truth, and I believe Mr. O'Connell has every right to know." McAllister shook his head. "It's not about truth or lies, but how this may affect his health. It's a delicate subject, and we must be careful." Garrett, impatient, raised his voice more firmly than usual. "Doctor, I appreciate your concern, but I am perfectly capable of understanding what affects me or not. I want to hear what she has to say." The doctor shot a disapproving glance, then seemed to give up trying to impose his will. He muttered something about medication time and hurried away, leaving them alone. Rosalind noticed her hand trembling as she closed the chart. "I'm sorry about that, Mr. O'Connell, but this matter involves more than just a donation of money. In fact, there's a secret in this story that may explain why you've been kept in the dark for so long." Garrett felt a chill run down his spine. "What kind of secret?" She looked around, making sure no one was listening. "I'd prefer to talk away from Dr. McAllister's gaze. I can only hint that this gesture not only changed my life, but may have saved others connected to you in ways you can't even imagine yet." He rested his hands on his knees, intrigued and a bit fearful. "Other people connected to me? Are you talking about—" "I can't guarantee anything yet," she interjected in a cautious whisper. "But I've investigated old records and believe something significant has been covered up. Please wait for me after dinner in the hallway near your room. If I can, I'll bring more proof." Garrett felt a tightening in his chest. On one hand, the prospect of uncovering something new about a period of his life he was trying to bury filled him with dread. On the other hand, the hope that the past had borne good fruit stirred his weary heart. Rosalind stood up, casting a quick glance in the direction McAllister had vanished. "Trust me, Mr. O'Connell. Not everything is lost to time." He watched her walk away, his mind swirling with questions. The quiet of the nursing home suddenly felt suffocating, as he now sensed a deeper mystery. Someone wanted to keep him away from the truth, and McAllister seemed to know more than he admitted. Garrett tried to rummage through his memory, but all that surfaced was the feeling of having sacrificed something when he lost his wife. Had that pain turned into something that truly saved many lives? Gripping his cane, he closed his eyes for a moment, focusing on the beats of his own heart. He knew he needed courage to face what lay ahead. When he opened his eyes, he noticed Dr. McAllister in the distance, watching him with an inscrutable expression. And at that moment, he had a clear conviction that the shadow of the past was just beginning to reveal itself. Before we continue with this emotional journey, take a moment to like this video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel. Your support is crucial for helping this channel grow and bring you more impactful stories. Thank you, and now, let's dive back in. Garrett woke up the next morning with his gaze fixed on the ceiling, memories blurred from a time he preferred to keep silent. He had dreamed of the moment after his wife's death when he made a decision that would forever mark the course of his life, selling a precious family heirloom to help someone he didn't even know. It was as if a small flame of hope had driven him at the time to make sense of his own pain. Now, sitting in a worn armchair at the nursing home, he realized how that gesture had remained hidden, never associated with specific faces or destinies. His heart trembled at the thought that Rosalind, a young woman who had confronted him days earlier, was living proof that the help had reached someone, generating unimaginable consequences. If she was right, and there were even more people who benefited, what would that mean for him? Could his past hold secrets greater than he had assumed? He tentatively made his way down the main corridor, where he crossed paths again with Miss Holloway. Without ceremony, the nurse noticed the worried expression on Garrett's face. "Good morning, Mr. O'Connell. Is everything all right?" He took a deep breath, facing her with a vulnerability he rarely displayed. "I need help," he replied. "There's something about a donation I made years ago, something that might have changed lives. Do you know if there are any records about it?" The mention of the word records made Holloway furrow her brow. "Look, the old records aren't available to just anyone," she explained, lowering her voice so that others wouldn't hear. "Some have been archived in the basement and a lot has been digitized, but I don't know if we'll have easy access to it." He realized she spoke cautiously, as if fearing the consequences of getting involved in that matter. "Why is all of this so complicated?" he questioned. Holloway shrugged. "Dr. McAllister doesn't like to dig into this place's past, sir." When she mentioned the doctor's name, Garrett felt a shiver. "Rosalind told me something similar," he commented. "She thinks he's hiding information." The nurse looked around, ensuring no one else was paying attention. "I wouldn't call it hiding, but he really prefers that we don't mess with old documents. He always says it brings painful memories and stirs up feelings in the patients." Despite her neutral tone, Garrett noticed that Holloway was also questioning whether there were deeper reasons. That afternoon, back in his room, Garrett recalled snippets of his own story. He envisioned himself younger, his face marked by the sadness of having lost his wife, but determined to find some purpose in the emptiness. He vividly remembered the moment he took an old gold locket, a family heirloom, and sold it to raise money. With that amount, he donated everything to a foundation that assisted families in extreme situations. At the time, he told himself that if the world was unjust, at least he would try to make a small difference. For the first time, he consciously associated that sacrifice with the possibility that Rosalind, among others, had benefited. The idea of having saved lives brought him a timid sense of pride, but also a huge fear. What else could have happened with that money? And why would Dr. McAllister be so intent on keeping such records a secret? He was surprised by the intensity of his own questions. He was certain of one thing: he wouldn't sit idly by waiting for answers to fall from the sky. Shortly after, Rosalind appeared, lightly knocking on the door. She held an envelope in her hands, her eyes shining with determination. "I managed to get this with great difficulty," she whispered, handing him the documents. "These are records from an old children's foundation that operated in the suburbs of Boston. Your name appears as an anonymous donor in several reports." Garrett flipped through the yellowed pages, each line evoking a different emotion. Among them, he found mentions of various children who had benefited. In the upper corner of one of the pages, he read the name Rosalind Carter. He couldn't hold back the tears, flowing gently down the wrinkles that had witnessed decades of suffering and struggle. "So it's true," he murmured, his voice choked. I really helped you." Rosalind knelt before him, lightly touching his hand. "You helped me, but also many other children. From what I see here, your money supported medical treatments and emergency surgeries. There was even a foster care program for youth." With each sentence, Garrett sank deeper into a mix of astonishment and hope. Then she turned a few more pages, stopping at a specific point. "It seems someone related to you also received indirect help," she said, indicating some smudged notes. "I don't quite understand, but it mentions something about a beneficiary who had a connection to the donor." Garrett's eyes widened. "What do you mean? I don't have any living relatives as far as I know. I only had my son who passed away. Could it be possible?" Before he could finish the question, Rosalind shook her head, confused. "We don't have details, but it's intriguing." Overcome by sudden unease, Garrett felt his heart race. "Where did you get these documents?" he asked with a trembling voice. "Were they in the nursing home's files?" She opened her mouth to answer, but just then, Dr. McAllister appeared in the doorway, his hard gaze sweeping the room. Rosalind quickly hid the papers, but not quickly enough to prevent him from noticing. With a contained expression, he cleared his throat. "I need to speak with you both privately. Would you mind coming with me to the infirmary, Rosalind?" Startled, she followed the doctor, casting one last anxious glance back at Garrett. Minutes later, she reappeared, breathless, holding only part of the documents. "Some files are missing," she declared, stunned. "I had them in my hands and suddenly, I can't find them anymore." Miss Holloway approached, whispering, "Dr. McAllister ordered certain files locked away tight. He doesn't want anyone digging into this." Garrett clenched his fists, feeling a rage he hadn't experienced in a long time. Why would the doctor care so much about old donations to the point of hiding information? Amid the shadows of this mystery, one certainty emerged. His act of kindness was not merely an anonymous good deed. There was something crucial in that past, something McAllister intended to keep buried. Garrett woke up in the early afternoon, his gaze fixed on the ceiling, his mind swirling with a torrent of memories that seemed to have broken free from an invisible captivity. Decades had passed since he buried his wife, spending days sitting on the porch, ruminating over her absence and his feelings of failure. One day, he received a letter from an old childhood friend named Richard Vernon. In that letter, Richard pleaded for help for a foundation that supported sick and abandoned children. Garrett remembered reading those lines with his heart still aching with grief, thinking, if I can't save myself, maybe I can save someone else. That was how he made his decision. He sold a gold brooch inherited from his mother, the last relic of his family, and sent the entire amount to the foundation. At the time, he believed that this gesture would be his symbolic farewell to a world where he felt invisible and purposeless. He closed his eyes for a moment, reliving the knot in his throat as he packed the brooch and sent it off to an antiquities dealer. He could almost hear the sound of the hammer hitting the wood when the auctioneer announced the sale. Now, as he repositioned himself in the armchair at the nursing home, Garrett tried to connect that past with the revelations surfacing. Rosalind had appeared out of nowhere, claiming to have been saved by his donation, and discovered clues suggesting that his son, the same son who had left full of resentment, might have indirectly received help from that very gesture. The idea that he had contributed to his survival or well-being, even unknowingly, filled him with a bittersweet mix of hope and pain. As he struggled to articulate the pieces of this emotional puzzle, Rosalind appeared in the hallway, talking to some of the older residents. Garrett noticed she seemed to be jotting down details in a blue notebook, her expression tense yet determined. Before he could call her, she approached, offering a concerned smile. "Mr. O'Connell, I've spoken to many people here. Did you know that years ago, an anonymous donation prevented the closure of this nursing home?" she asked, flipping through the pages of her notebook. "Several long-term residents remember a crisis that almost led to the place's bankruptcy. And from what I found, the money came, in part, from the same children's foundation you helped." Garrett leaned forward, feeling his heart race. "You mean to say that my gesture also influenced the survival of this place?" he asked, searching for a greater meaning in it all. She nodded. "Everything indicates that yes. This makes me believe that your generosity was much broader than you imagined." They walked slowly to the nursing home's outdoor wing, where a small garden of white roses was trying to withstand the heat of the late afternoon. As Rosalind explained what she had uncovered, Garrett felt his chest swell with something he hadn't felt in a long time. The sensation that his past choices were echoing positively, crossing temporal barriers. "I managed to trace some additional records," she continued, showing notes on the foundation and the flow of capital directed to social programs. "I found that there was a shelter for young adults who were homeless or facing family conflicts. It emerged around the same time your donation was received." Garrett held his breath. "My son. He left at 17, full of anger at me and the hard life we led. I always blamed myself for not giving him more. Could it be that he ended up in that program?" His voice choked on the last words, as if uttering such a possibility was a mix of relief and suffering. Rosalind stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We can't be sure, but there are indications that a young man with similar characteristics passed through there, receiving support to study and rebuild his life. I'm still cross-referencing data, but everything points in that direction." A shiver ran down Garrett's spine at hearing this. If it were true, then his son might have had the chance for a better future, even while being away from home, thanks to the silent sacrifice he had made. For the first time in a long while, a glimmer of optimism made him smile shyly. But the joy barely lasted 2 seconds, as Dr. McAllister suddenly appeared in the garden, striding through the rosebed with quick steps. "Rosalind," he bellowed, his voice laced with irritation, "how many times must I repeat that you shouldn't encourage Mr. O'Connell with these vain hopes? The past is the past. We don't want unnecessary agitation." "This isn't unnecessary, Doctor," Rosalind shot back, gripping her notebook tightly. "He has the right to know, and so do we. This story involves the nursing home, involves people who could have been forgotten." The doctor took a breath, glaring at her with intensity. "You are overstepping your responsibilities. If you continue insisting, I will initiate the transfer process. I won't allow you to disturb our patients with speculation." Garrett felt a lump in his throat. He didn't want Rosalind to be punished for helping him. With a weak but determined voice, he intervened. "Doctor, I don't feel disturbed. I feel alive. After years, something finally makes sense to me. Would it really be so cruel to discover the truth?" McAllister hesitated, perhaps feeling the weight of those words, but he soon cleared his throat, maintaining his composure. "I'm sorry, Mr. O'Connell, but my obligation is to ensure your health. Excessive concerns can cause cardiac stress, and that is dangerous at your age." "Dangerous is living without answers," Garrett whispered back almost inaudibly. McAllister said nothing, merely turned his back and walked away, leaving behind a trail of tension. When night fell, Miss Holloway found Garrett and Rosalind sitting in the common room. She looked distressed, holding a yellowed envelope and a page from an old newspaper. "I rummaged through some files in the basement. Look at this." She placed before them a clipping with the headline, "Sick Girl Finds Miracle in Anonymous Donation." Below it, a photo of a pale, smiling child. Rosalind covered her mouth upon recognizing herself in that old image. "It was me," she murmured, her voice choked. Holloway pointed to another part of the article that discussed a shelter for homeless youth. The name of the coordinator sounded incredibly familiar to Garrett. This surname, McFadden. "He is an old acquaintance of my family," he exclaimed, surprised. "I remember he worked with troubled teenagers. He could have guided my son or even supported him to follow a different path." Garrett's heart raced. That meant he wasn't the only one blessed by the donation. It was plausible that the money had also reached the young man who had run away from home years earlier, possibly providing him with the structure Garrett had never been able to give. Swallowing hard, he felt hope blossoming. Perhaps his son was still out there, alive and safe, thanks to that gesture. "We need to find out more," Rosalind said, gently touching the clipping. "If McFadden is still active, we can find him." Garrett agreed. "It's time to follow these leads. If my son was helped by that program, I need to know what happened to him." That night, before settling in, Garrett looked out at the silent landscape through the window of his room and let out a sigh. The sensation that his past was not as dark as he had thought brought warmth to his chest. But alongside that comfort came the fear. What if it all was one big illusion? Still, he resolved to continue. Any risk was worth taking to find the lost bridge between generations. Rosalind emerged from the hallway of the asylum with a face marked by the urgency of someone who had something to reveal. She found Garrett sitting in the armchair near the window, his fingers twisting the handkerchief in his lap. He lifted his gaze as he noticed her approach, feeling his heart tighten with a mix of hope and apprehension. In a low voice, Rosalind announced her discovery. She had located the coordinator of the social program that had, years ago, received funding from the same donation that had helped many children. This man, now elderly, had agreed to talk, and according to her, he might have crucial information about Garrett's son. "His name is McFadden," Rosalind whispered, kneeling beside Garrett. "That report Miss Holloway brought mentioned this name. I dug deeper and managed to get a phone number. He's willing to speak with me." Garrett felt a shiver run down his spine. "My son, could McFadden have known him?" Rosalind nodded, holding the old man's hand. "That's what I hope to find out. But—" she swallowed hard, hesitating to continue. Dr. McAllister was clear. He prohibited any outing that isn't authorized. He says external visits must follow strict guidelines. Immediately, Garrett's shoulders slumped. "So we're at a standstill." He tried to keep his voice steady, but the discouragement betrayed him. Ever since the doctor learned about these investigations, he had imposed increasingly strict restrictions. Just then, the door to the room swung open, revealing the stern figure of McAllister. He approached with arms crossed, staring at Rosalind as if she were the source of all problems. "Nurse Carter, I need to remind you that this asylum follows protocols. I don't want to see my patients agitated or exposed to disappointments." Rosalind stood up slowly, but did not back down. "Dr. Mr. O'Connell has the right to seek answers. This meeting would be crucial to understanding what happened to his son." "And if these answers only bring more pain," McAllister retorted, frowning, "I made it clear that I will not allow external contacts without approval from management. We are responsible for the physical and mental well-being of our residents." Garrett felt his breath catch at those words. "I'm not a puppet," he protested, his voice choked with indignation. "I've spent my whole life without answers, Doctor. Don't deny me the chance to learn the other side of the story." The doctor sighed, impatient. "My decision is made. Rosalind, be aware that one more infraction and I will initiate your formal transfer." With that, he hurried out, leaving a trail of tension in the air. In silence, Rosalind touched Garrett's arm, conveying a silent plea for patience. Something in her expression indicated that she did not intend to give up regardless of the threats. Still, a heavy atmosphere settled over the asylum, with suspicious glances from the staff and whispered comments in the hallways. Many sensed that there was a clash between Garrett's legitimate desire and McAllister's inflexible stance. That very night, when the corridors emptied, Rosalind and Miss Holloway led Garrett to the administrative wing, where patients rarely had permission to enter. The fluorescent lights gave the space a cold tone, and the sound of the air conditioning seemed louder than usual. Rosalind, with a small flashlight, opened a side door that led to old contingency files. "We need to be quick," she murmured, signaling Garrett to follow. "They keep documents here that haven't been digitized. We might find something more concrete." He felt his heart race at the sight of piles of files and yellowed folders stretching across dusty shelves. Miss Holloway grabbed an extra flashlight, and together they began sifting through labels and indexes. At one point, Rosalind pulled out a thick bundle of papers. Her eyes sparkled as she read a familiar name. "Mr. O'Connell, look at this." She extended the paper and pointed to a record that mentioned a youth assistance program. Surprisingly, it listed Garrett's son's name, linked to a grant from the same fund he had helped sustain. The impact of those words hit Garrett like a wave. Overwhelmed with emotion, he clutched the document with trembling hands, and tears spilled uncontrollably. "He really was involved in that program," he said, his voice breaking. "So my donation gave him a new chance." The reverent silence of Rosalind and Holloway confirmed it. Before they could linger on the moment, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Dr. McAllister entered the room, his gaze flashing with displeasure as he discovered the three rummaging through the files. "What in the—" he began, nostrils flaring. "Why are you insisting on this?" Garrett pressed the document against his chest. "Why did you hide this from me? Why did you try to stop Rosalind from helping?" The doctor sighed, revealing an anguish he hadn't shown before. "Your son came here years ago, Mr. O'Connell. I found him crying in the lobby holding a photo of you. He was confused, filled with fear of being rejected." A chill ran through Garrett. He was here, why didn't you tell me?" McAllister averted his gaze as if recalling a painful memory. "I feared that the reunion would bring more wounds. He spoke of old hurts, resentment for growing up in poverty. And you were still very fragile. I believed it would be worse for both of you. I convinced him to leave." Those words left Garrett disoriented. His own son had been mere steps away while he, unaware, had withered in solitude. "How could you make that decision for us?" he questioned, his voice resonating with anger and despair. The doctor rubbed his forehead, attempting to contain the emotion rising within him. "I did what I thought was best at the time. I didn't expect you to discover the fund or for Rosalind to be so persistent." Overcome by the pain of the revelation, Garrett felt his legs weaken, and Miss Holloway rushed to help him maintain his balance. He understood now the reason for so many barriers, but it was still hard to accept that his son had been so close. "So he came back looking for his father and was discouraged from entering," he murmured, burying his face in his hands. Rosalind looked at McAllister, her eyes filled with indignation. "That wasn't your choice to make, Doctor. So many years lost." The doctor swallowed hard. "Perhaps I was wrong, but there's no way to turn back." Garrett, however, lifted his face. A renewed determination shone in his tear-filled eyes. "I need to find my son, to know what happened. It doesn't matter what you think or say." Rosalind by his side squeezed his shoulder. "I promise we will make this right. I'll do whatever it takes." As they left the administrative wing, Garrett felt a heavy weight in his chest, with the belated awareness of how close he had been to his son. Within him, a courage was born that transcended the pain. For now, he was convinced that his sacrifice from long ago had been crucial for his son's life. What remained was to discover where that young man was, and why he continued to stay so distant. Thus, even devastated, he found himself determined to overcome every obstacle. The past could not be undone, but the future might still hold a reunion that would compensate for the scars accumulated. In the somber silence of the hallway, Rosalind squeezed his hand and whispered, "It's not over yet. What comes next could change everything." Garrett woke up the next morning, still weighed down by the revelations of the previous day. He felt a bittersweet mix of relief and anguish. He finally knew that his son had been involved in the social program funded by the anonymous donation, but he also discovered that the reunion had been blocked by McAllister. Across the hallway, Rosalind donned her lab coat with unwavering determination. She held a small notebook and, upon noticing Garrett, approached him with firm steps, though her expression was one of concern. "I managed to speak with McFadden, the former coordinator of the social program," she said without preamble. "He's elderly but still lucid. He talked to me over the phone and confirmed that your son did, in fact, receive help in his youth. And more. He's alive, lives in another city, and according to McFadden has built a certain stability after leaving the program." Garrett felt a pang in his chest, the mix of joy and fear emerging. "He is okay then?" The words came out trembling, revealing how fragile he had become at the prospect of real contact with his son. Rosalind adjusted the notebook against her chest. From what I understood, yes. But McFadden mentioned that your son carries deep wounds. He feels abandoned, believing that you didn't make an effort to find him. Little does he know that you've always sought him in thought, but had no clues. Before Garrett could respond, Dr. McAllister appeared in the hallway, his heavy footsteps echoing on the floor. He cleared his throat, glancing at Garrett, and then turning to Rosalind. Miss Carter insists on reviving ghosts. I hope you've reflected on the risk of disappointment for Mr. O'Connell. Rosalind raised her eyebrows, keeping her voice steady. Doctor, we've reached a point where he knows most of the facts. Hiding more would be unfair. And as for the wounds, we're not the ones who should decide. Only Mr. O'Connell and his son can do that. McAllister took a deep breath, looking as if he was struggling with conflicting feelings. I thought that sparing him from frustrations was best. When I saw his son here years ago, extremely resentful, I thought reopening those wounds would be cruelty. But I recognize I caused greater pain. Garrett, with a slight tremor in his voice, interjected, Doctor, I understand your concern, but I don't need a surrogate father protecting me from suffering. I need the truth. I'm not made of glass. The doctor held his gaze for a few seconds, then conceded with a slight nod. I understand. I just hope you know how much this could cost you emotionally. Any pain will be less than living without answers, Garrett concluded, stretching out his trembling hand and resting it on the wall as if seeking strength. Later, Rosalind, seeking refuge in a quiet corner of the cafeteria, stared at her phone nervously. For the first time, she had managed to get Garrett's son's number, thanks to the notes that McFadden still kept. She didn't know what kind of reaction to expect, but decided to take the risk. She called once, it went to voicemail. Twice, no one answered. On the third call, she heard a hesitant, tired male voice. Hello? Her heart raced. Hi, I'm Rosalind Carter. I'm sorry for calling like this. I have information about your father. The silence on the other end was almost palpable. When the man spoke again, there was a tone of caution mixed with bitterness. Father, I haven't had contact with that man in decades. Why are you getting involved in this? Because I owe my life to him, Rosalind confessed, placing a tremendous weight on each word. And I thought you should know that he never stopped thinking about you. There was another long pause of silence. Then the voice returned, still hesitant. He hardly thought about me. If he did, he would have looked for me. It's complicated, Rosalind defended herself. He always blamed himself for your departure, and we were prevented from discovering the truth. You may not believe it now, but there is proof that he did a lot for you, even without knowing it would reach you. The man let out a dry laugh. Proof? You think I'm going to fall for some fanciful talk? It's not fantasy. I have records of donations, documents showing how his money supported programs that took you in. If you want, I can send them to you. He let out a sigh, almost defeated. Look, I'm not going to slam the door in your face, but I'm also not going to open up just like that. If you really have that proof, send it to me. Then I'll think about whether it's worth considering a reunion. Rosalind thanked him, trembling with relief as she hung up. It had only been the beginning, but at least he hadn't completely rejected the idea. With that in mind, she sought out Garrett to share the news. She found him sitting in a wheelchair, resting near the indoor garden. He answered, Mr. O'Connell. He spoke little, he's hurt inside, but he didn't hang up on me. Garrett smiled with teary eyes. God, it's more than I expected. My worst fears were that he was dead, or that he hated me so much he would refuse to listen. It won't be simple, but it's a step, Rosalind reinforced, touching the elderly man's shoulder. Before they could plan the sending of the documents, they were interrupted by Miss Holloway, her expression worried. There's a notice from the administration. Rosalind, you'll have to transfer to another unit. You've been given a 48-hour notice. Garrett raised his head in shock. What? But why? The administration says there's been a breach of protocols, interference in the routine of the nursing home. Dr. McAllister probably couldn't stop you from continuing to dig around, so this is their way of getting rid of you, Rosalind." The nurse huffed, holding back her anger. "I knew there would be retaliation, but I didn't think it would come so quickly." Garrett felt indignation bubbling up. "This is an injustice, you're just helping." Rosalind took a deep breath, forcing a smile to calm the elderly man. "Don't worry, I'm not leaving without sending the proof to your son and ensuring he understands the truth. I'll have little time, but I won't give up." The following night, as the clock ticked down the last hours of her shift, Rosalind printed and scanned all the crucial records proving Garrett's donation, as well as the impact on various social projects. In a quick email, she attached everything and sent it to Garrett's son, with an honest message explaining how his gesture had saved lives, hers included, and why his father had never given up on finding him. When she finished, she returned to Garrett's room and shared her actions. "I've sent it. I hope he replies before I leave. I want to see you two start to understand each other." The elderly man moved, wiped away a silent tear. "If he understands that I never abandoned him at heart, it will already be a relief." However, time was running against them. With only 48 hours remaining, any reconciliation would need a miracle to happen quickly. The nursing home was enveloped in a silent tension, staff whispering in corners, while Rosalind tried to finish her work without being watched. The last look they exchanged that night carried the question neither dared to voice: will the son respond in time? And even more distressing, will Rosalind be able to stay even one more day? The pace of events was accelerating, and all they could do was wait for the unfolding of the next steps. Steps that could completely change the fate of Garrett, Rosalind, and above all, the long-lost son. Thank you for staying with us through this powerful story. If you're enjoying it, please hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. It means so much for the growth of this channel and allows us to create more inspiring content for you. Now, back to the story. Garrett awoke with a racing heart, his breath quickening with the anxiety that had grown since the news of Rosalind's impending transfer. With each passing minute, the feeling of losing his last chance to reconcile with his son consumed him. He realized that the stress was taking a toll on his body. Sometimes his heart would beat so hard it left him dizzy. Yet he refused to surrender to despair. Sitting in his wheelchair by the window of his room, he clutched the handkerchief that the nurse had left for him the night before, promising not to leave until his mission was complete. Miss Holloway, ever attentive, entered the room discreetly, carrying a pitcher of fresh water. Seeing him so troubled, she set the pitcher down on the table and approached, placing her hand on his shoulder. "Mr. O'Connell, try to stay calm. The deadline is tight, but the seed has been planted. Perhaps your son will respond more quickly than we expect." Garrett clenched his lips, his voice coming out almost as a whisper. "I don't doubt Rosalind's good intentions, but I'm afraid time won't be enough, and I feel my body weakening with each passing day." Holloway nodded, gazing at him with tenderness. "Have you spoken to Dr. McAllister about your condition? He told me he's willing to monitor your blood pressure and heart more closely." "I don't want anything from him," Garrett replied, not with anger, but with a pang of pain. "I just want them to let Rosalind finish what she started." The nurse placed her hand over his in a gesture of solidarity. At that moment, Rosalind appeared in the corridor, pulling back the curtain and entering with her somewhat wrinkled lab coat. She flashed a quick smile at Garrett, but behind her firm gaze was a growing tension. "I managed to speak to McFadden again. He's going to try to contact your son if he doesn't respond soon, but for now there's still no word on the email we sent." Garrett took a deep breath, feeling the tightness in his chest increase. Time is running out." Rosalind knelt beside his wheelchair, trying to encourage the elderly man. "I won't give up. If I'm transferred, I promise to leave detailed instructions with Miss Holloway. Your son will know the truth, whether he wants to hear it now or later." He blinked to push away the tears, feeling a weakness he had never known. He needed to hold on a little longer, to believe that this thread of hope would not snap. Even weakened, He saw in Rosalind's determination the spark of courage that sustained him. As evening fell, the nursing home settled into a peculiar atmosphere. The elderly retreated to their rooms while some staff members switched shifts. Garrett rested, but his heart remained restless. It was then that the receptionist, a woman with grey hair, appeared at the door of the room, looking at him with surprise. "Mr. O'Connell, there's someone on the phone wanting to speak to you. They didn't identify themselves at first, but it seems important." Garrett felt a leap in his chest, and Rosalind, who had been adjusting pillows, exchanged an anxious glance with him. Together, they followed the receptionist down the corridor to where a landline phone was still ringing. The receptionist handed the phone to Rosalind, who passed it to Garrett. He brought it cautiously to his ear. "Hello?" On the other end of the line, a male voice, heavy with resentment, filled the silence. "Dad, is it true that you're looking for me?" The world seemed to stop at that moment. Garrett felt his hand tremble, sweat breaking out on his forehead. "My son, yes, I am. I've always been, but I didn't know how to find you." The voice on the other end faltered, as if struggling between hurt and the desire to talk. "You say that now, after all this time. You don't know how many times I waited for a letter, a message." Garrett tightened his grip on the phone, the words catching in his throat. "I have no excuses. I just want you to understand that I never stopped loving you. I did what I could, but I didn't know where you had gone." He heard a choked sigh. "That nurse Rosalind told me about a donation that saved lives, including hers, and she says that indirectly, it helped me. I heard that I came to the nursing home one day and was turned away. Do you know how much that hurt me?" Garrett felt the knot tighten in his throat. "I didn't know you had come, I swear. I just found out now, and I suffer every minute for not having met you." His son hesitated, the heavy breathing on the other end indicating contained tears. "Mom died young, and then you started to fall apart. I couldn't stand that misery, that lack of perspective. I ran away, hoping you would look for me. But time passed and nothing." Garrett, now crying, confessed, "I did what I could, but I was lost, drowning in grief and guilt. I thought I had nothing left to offer you. That's why, when I sold my only valuable possession and donated it, I thought maybe someone could give you what I couldn't." There was a long silence. Then the son admitted, "Indeed, I found support in that program. They gave me a chance to study, to work. But why didn't you ever show up?" "I was denied that opportunity. I was also a victim of those who thought they were sparing us pain. But please listen to me. I've always prayed to find you again." He heard a muffled sob. "So now I don't know what to think. I just feel anger and sadness. Maybe it's too late." Garrett trembled all over, searching for strength he no longer had. "It's never too late to start over. I don't want your gratitude. I just wanted you to know that I love you. If you want to blame me, you have every right, but I won't give up on you." On the other end, the voice sounded vulnerable. "Rosalind, is she there? I would like to meet the woman you saved." Garrett looked at Rosalind, who was listening to every word with tears in her eyes. She nodded, and he responded into the phone. "She's here. Why?" "I don't know. Maybe because if she saw something good in you, I want to understand what I lost." Garrett's heart filled with hope. "Then come, son, but please don't take long." The call ended shortly after, leaving a void in the air. Garrett turned to Rosalind, who was wiping her eyes. He asked about me, didn't he?" she whispered. "This could be the start of a reconciliation." But the nurse also remembered the relentless clock. Her time was running out. If Garrett's son didn't show up soon, she would be forced to leave, breaking the bond she had sown with so much sacrifice. As much as she wanted to, she couldn't fight against the administration's decisions for much longer. In a mix of relief and tension, Garrett released the phone and leaned against the wall to avoid falling. Weaker than ever, he knew that every minute counted. Rosalind's presence was crucial for his son to feel secure upon arrival. The problem was, how much time was left before the transfer? And above all, would his son be able to let go of his resentment and cross the nursing home's door in time to heal the wounds of so many years? The tense silence filled the corridor, bringing the certainty that the unfolding of the next few days would decide everything. The sun had barely risen on the horizon when Rosalind stepped cautiously into the corridor, still unable to believe what she had just heard. The asylum's administration, pressured by the outcry of the residents and the evident positive impact she had on Garrett's life, decided to grant him one more day before his transfer. McAllister, awkwardly, had only announced the extension without being able to meet Rosalind's gaze. For her, that brief reprieve represented an invaluable chance to fulfill her mission, to ensure that Garrett and his son could reconcile. Upon hearing the news, Garrett almost dropped his cane from sheer emotion. His face, once heavy with despair, now shone with a radiant hope. Fragile, he still felt the consequences of the stress that had battered his weary heart, but the prospect of having Rosalind by his side at least until the following day restored a spirit he hadn't felt in decades. He moved about the room with an unusual energy, picking up scattered items, carefully folding a shirt, and finally adjusting a faded tie he had kept for years. It seemed he was preparing for a solemn occasion, as if his heart whispered that something grand was about to happen. Rosalind smiled at seeing him so attentive to the details. She approached, gently touching his shoulder. "How do you feel, Mr. O'Connell? Did you sleep well?" He paused in his efforts to arrange the tie and turned to her, his eyes misty. "Not much, I confess, but waking up to this news has given me a new lease on life. It feels like every minute counts now." She nodded, sharing in the same anxiety. The night before, she had received a brief message from Garrett's son, promising to try to visit his father as soon as possible. However, uncertainty loomed over every corner of the asylum. No one knew if he would actually show up that day. And if he did, would he be capable of overcoming the emotional barriers that had kept them apart for so long? As the hours passed, the asylum seemed to hold its breath. Occasionally, a resident would pass by Garrett's room to wish him luck or comment in hushed tones on how his story had touched everyone. Miss Holloway, in between tasks, peeked down the corridor, waiting to see any sign of an unexpected visitor. McAllister, for his part, kept his distance, embarrassed for having underestimated the strength of Garrett's and Rosalind's will. Time moved on until midday. Outside, the sun began to descend, casting elongated shadows across the garden. Garrett leaned on his cane and, with Rosalind's help, made his way to the common area. There, he could see anyone entering the building, and it provided him more space to walk without feeling confined. A slight tremor ran through his body, both from anxiety and the physical strain that had accumulated over the days. Then, amid the whispers and anticipation, firm footsteps echoed in the entrance corridor. A tall man with a tense expression paused at the door, holding a small suitcase in his left hand and looking as if he wasn't sure whether he should proceed. Rosalind, standing beside Garrett, recognized him from the description and squeezed the elderly man's arm to help him stand. They exchanged glances, confirming the same suspicion. It was the son. The man entered hesitantly, scanning the room with his eyes until they landed on Garrett. Time seemed to freeze. For a few seconds, no one moved. Only the silence screamed of longing, pain, and hurt that hovered in the air. Rosalind took a step back, alongside Miss Holloway, allowing father and son to face each other without interference. Garrett tried to speak, but his voice faltered, forcing him to clear his throat. "You really came," he whispered, feeling his legs tremble. The newcomer dropped the suitcase on the floor, keeping a few feet away. "So I came, but I don't know for how long. I need answers." Garrett gripped his cane tightly, breathing deeply. Ask whatever you want, just don't leave without hearing me out." The man took a step forward, his expression inscrutable. "Why didn't you look for me all these years? I waited for some sign from you." Garrett lowered his gaze, feeling the weight of guilt. "I didn't have the financial means. I could barely get by. And above all, I felt ashamed, afraid of being a burden. Later, when you came back here, they told you I couldn't receive visitors." The son clenched his fists, staring into the void. "I was so angry. I felt like you simply didn't care." Garrett lifted his head, tears beginning to show. "I always cared, son. I made a donation in the past not knowing that it would reach you. It was my way of loving, even without being able to offer anything directly." At this point, Rosalind, unable to remain silent, stepped forward and stood beside Garrett, looking into the man's eyes. "He saved my life without even knowing me. Your father was an unsung hero for many children, and even unknowingly, he sustained programs that sheltered you when you needed it most, all out of love." The son blinked, surprised by the intensity of her words, and something broke within him. The barriers built by years of hurt began to crumble. He looked at Garrett differently, seeing not just a frail old man, but the man who had tried to do his best in silence. Tears streamed down his face discreetly, and he cautiously stepped closer. Garrett extended one trembling hand. "I know I can't erase the past, but if there's still any space in your heart, I'd like to start over." For a few moments, the son hesitated, then took a step forward and accepted that touch. Anger battled with the tenderness that had just awakened, but love was there, pulsating. Awkwardly, they embraced, timidly, yet filled with hope. After so many decades, it was the first real contact, the first moment in which father and son allowed themselves to resume a bond long interrupted. Miss Holloway clasped her hands together at her chest, while Rosalind, with tears in her eyes, managed a smile that mixed relief and emotion. Time seemed to stand still, freezing that scene of reconciliation, or at least an attempt at it. Amid the uncertainties remained the promise of a new beginning, and in that fragile embrace, love finally found a way to manifest. Then gently the son stepped back and exchanged a knowing look with Rosalind, acknowledging the decisive role she had played. He murmured a barely perceptible "thank you," but it was laden with meaning. Garrett, still leaning on his cane, wiped his tears and whispered, "I don't know how things will be from here on out, but please stay with me a little longer." The son nodded, still unable to say much. The spark of reconnection was lit, and everything indicated that, if they wished, they could cross together that bridge toward a brighter future, where the pains of the past would transform into lessons learned. Shortly after the timid embrace between Garrett and his son, the asylum's corridors seemed to gain new color. For the first time in a long while, the somber silence gives way to smiles and lively whispers. Patients and staff speak softly about the reunion they witnessed, as if they want to preserve the magic of the moment. Even Dr. McAllister, who is usually so stoic, begins to walk with less of a scowl, greeting the residents with a discreet nod. The tension that once hung over the hallways gradually dissipates, replaced by an atmosphere of hope. In the following mornings, the asylum's routine fills with small, silent celebrations. Some patients offer homemade cookies to Garrett and his son, while older nurses recount stories of other reunions they have witnessed over the years. Miss Holloway, with her usual efficiency and dedication, sets up a quiet corner in the common room for Garrett and his son to talk without interruptions. Rosalind, always by their side, brings calming teas, adjusts cushions, and subtly creates opportunities for them to share memories about the boy's childhood, the times when Garrett's wife was still alive, and the donation that saved so many lives. These daily meetings serve as small bridges over the chasm of the past. As the words flow, old wounds begin to heal. The son, still struggling to believe that his father played such a crucial role in the program that embraced him, admits to feeling torn between resentment and a growing recognition of Garrett's sacrifice. In turn, Garrett rediscovers an inner strength he thought he had lost. He makes it a point to wake up a little earlier to comb his thinning hair, choose clean clothes, and exercise his legs before their conversations. Often he sits in silence beside his son, simply savoring the companionship he had long missed. When they finally exchange a few words, the mood is one of introspection, but also of mutual curiosity. Of course, Garrett's physical limitations remain, and sometimes his fatigue forces him to pause the dialogue for rest. In those moments, Rosalind suggests that the son take a stroll through the gardens, learning about the asylum's history, or converse with other residents, exchanging life experiences. Gradually, the place that once filled him with dread inspires in him respect and empathy. The young man begins to see the community that has formed there, made up of lonely individuals who in their own way find a temporary home. When the third day of their conversations arrives, Garrett wakes with a serene heart, feeling almost reborn. He sees his son flipping through a magazine in the corner of the room and thinks of how many times he had dreamed of having him close by. Rosalind appears with coffee and a gentle smile. Before the elderly man can express his gratitude, Dr. McAllister enters, his expression contained but visibly emotional. Without preamble, he approaches Garrett, Rosalind, and the son, who stands up reflexively. "Mr. O'Connell, Nurse Carter, the doctor begins, clearing his throat to regain his composure. "I want to apologize. I was driven by the fear that this would end in more pain. Now, I realize that I underestimated your courage. The truth can indeed hurt, but it also heals. And I confess that witnessing this reconciliation has touched me in ways I did not expect." Garrett looks at the man, recalling how much anger he felt when he learned that the doctor had prevented their reunion in the past. Yet now he feels more compassion than resentment. "Doctor, everyone makes mistakes. I know you were trying to protect me, but I'm relieved to see that you've changed your mind." McAllister turns to Rosalind, holding back the emotion that blurs his vision. "Nurse Carter, I know your transfer deadline still stands, but if there's anything I can do to extend it officially, it's within my power. I recognize that your persistence has been crucial." Before Rosalind can respond, she notices Miss Holloway approaching, holding a white envelope. Holloway signals with her eyes that it contains correspondence from another hospital. Rosalind opens it, swallows hard, and turns to Garrett and his son. "It's a job offer at a larger clinic in a nearby city, and they would like me to start soon." Her voice is choked. "But I can't leave now, not while I'm not sure that I'm leaving Mr. O'Connell and his son in good hands." The son casts a grateful glance at Rosalind. He remembers how touched he was by her story, how his father helped him without knowing, and how she became a bridge between the two. "If this job is important, you should accept it, right?" he comments, trying to mask his disappointment. "It is indeed a good opportunity," she admits hesitantly, "but I also feel that you both have become part of me. I wouldn't have made it this far if it weren't for Mr. O'Connell, and now, seeing you together makes me want to stay to ensure that everything goes well." Garrett takes Rosalind's hand. "You've already done so much, my dear. I couldn't ask you to sacrifice your career. Life has taught me that we all have to follow paths that open up, but that doesn't mean we lose what we've gained." Dr. McAllister and Miss Holloway exchange glances, contemplating solutions. The mood is optimistic, yet an impasse arises. Rosalind doesn't want to leave, but she also doesn't want to pass up the chance for professional growth. At a certain point, the son clears his throat, drawing everyone's attention. "So I've been thinking about something," he announces, scratching the back of his neck, visibly uneasy. "Life has been tough on me, but I've managed to save some money. I'm not rich, but I can contribute to a local institution that needs funding. Maybe, if we could invest in some kind of support project for the elderly or something like that, we could open spots for capable professionals. That way, Rosalind could have a place to work close to where my dad is." Rosalind's eyes widen, and McAllister raises his eyebrows, intrigued. "You're suggesting a partnership with the asylum?" the doctor asks. "Or a shelter next door, something that expands the possibilities," the son continues. "I thought that if Rosalind wanted, she could be one of the technical supervisors. I'd also help, perhaps attracting more donors. It's a way to give back to the system that once supported me, while keeping the nurse who saved my relationship with my father nearby." Garrett smiles, moved. "Son, that's wonderful. I never imagined we would get this far. An extension of the asylum or a new program could help other families too." With their hearts warmed by hope, they all look at each other, recognizing the budding of a new reality. Rosalind beams with emotion, realizing that more than just a job offer, the son's proposal signals a chance to build something meaningful. McAllister, for his part, gives a slight nod, understanding how this path could repair mistakes and open horizons. The asylum, which in other times had been a stage for secrets and fears, transforms into a space of collaboration and promises. with the possibility of joining forces to improve the lives of the elderly and give back the good that Garrett had sown in the past. A vibrant expectation for a shared future emerges. The scene concludes in a reverent silence, filled with enthusiasm. The life that once seemed constrained by old pains now projects itself on the wings of new ideas, dreams, and rediscoveries. As the months passed, a subtle atmosphere of transformation enveloped the nursing home. Now, under a new agreement that recognized the value of human contact, Rosalind continued to work there, much to the relief of all the residents. Despite receiving more competitive job offers, she insisted on staying at least part-time until she felt Garrett was fully supported. Garrett's son, in turn, kept his promise to visit him regularly, contributing with donations and small events that strengthened the bonds within the place. Anyone walking through the hallways would find a climate of peace and welcome. The once hesitant conversations gave way to knowing smiles, and the healthier residents helped those in wheelchairs navigate the gardens. Garrett, although more fragile, would smile whenever he spotted his son or Rosalind. He often spent his mornings in his wheelchair by the window, soaking up the soft sunlight while birds perched on the sill. At times, he would share stories from his youth, reminiscing about outings with his wife to listen to music in the town square. His son, still learning to manage his own emotions, absorbed every word and frequently asked about his mother, trying to fill the gaps of a life that had become distant after her departure. Rosalind also expressed curiosity about the feminine figure who, unbeknownst to her, had influenced everyone by leaving Garrett a widower and motivating him to donate everything he had. Around them, a small group of residents gathered, listening in silence or asking pointed questions, eager for any spark of hope. With the atmosphere of reconciliation solidified, Garrett experienced a lightness he hadn't felt in decades. Even when tired, he made sure to lift his head and smile, aware that the seed of kindness he had planted in the past was now blooming in unexpected ways. One day, he asked his son to open an old box stored at the back of the bedroom closet. Inside, they found yellowed photographs showing a young Garrett and his wife, smiling amidst a picnic or dancing hand in hand in a time-worn hall. Those memories reignited a long-lost affection in the son, confirming that his father had indeed experienced moments of genuine happiness before pain and poverty had separated them. One late afternoon, as the sun painted the hallways with golden hues, Rosalind approached Garrett and his son, who were chatting by a little tea table. She waited for a pause in the conversation before announcing in a shy yet radiant manner the news that would further deepen their bonds. She was expecting a child. Silence fell over the trio for a moment, then tears of contained joy flowed. Garrett extended his trembling hand to Rosalind, and his son did the same. The three shared an affectionate embrace, swept up in the whirlwind of emotions that those words had brought. The baby will grow up knowing that one day someone donated what they had to save the lives of people they didn't even know, said Rosalind, caressing her belly. It was that gesture that brought me here. So, I want my child to know that kindness is possible even in the moments of greatest pain. Garrett sighed, feeling breathless for a second. So deep was the emotion. I could never have imagined that donation, he began, his voice breaking. I never supposed it would take root so firmly, supporting new generations. It's more than I deserve. His son gently corrected him. Dad, you deserve it, and you always have. Only now do I see how much love was hidden in your gestures, perhaps too late, but still in time to do something greater. The atmosphere in the nursing home seemed enveloped in a profound tenderness. Everyone felt that feeling vibrate through the hallways. The embrace the trio shared also resonated in the hearts of other residents who saw their proof that sincere reconciliations were possible, even when everything seemed lost. Many approached to congratulate Rosalind, and Garrett smiled, as if each congratulation was an affirmation of the beauty of existence. Miss Holloway, observing from a distance, let a few discreet tears fall, imagining how that baby would be born into a slightly better world, thanks to an elderly man who once believed he was insignificant. On a serene morning, the air still carried the scent of freshly bloomed flowers in the garden. Rosalind passed by Garrett's room to check his blood pressure, but noticed he was sleeping deeply, with a peaceful expression. She found it curious that his breathing was so soft, almost imperceptible. She approached, softly calling his name. "Mr. O'Connell, I came to see if you're okay." There was no response. Then she understood the truth. Garrett had fallen asleep for the last time, at peace, in the very heart of the place he had come to love so much. The news spread through the corridors in tearful whispers. While Garrett's son rushed to the room to say goodbye, Rosalind held the cold hand of the man who, unwittingly, had saved her life. Her silent tears were of gratitude, not just sadness. Miss Holloway tried to contain her sobs, comforting other residents who came to bid farewell to the man who had made the entire nursing home believe in everyday miracles. The son, in tears, leaned over the bed, mourning the lost time, but also thanking his father for the last months they had shared. "Dad, I promise your story doesn't end here," he whispered, kissing his forehead. Rosalind, touched by the pain and fullness of that farewell, recalled their recent conversations about how to continue Garrett's legacy. His words seemed to echo still. There are so many others who need a second chance. The week following the funeral, Rosalind and Garrett's son met in the lawyer's office that had handled the elderly man's legal affairs. There, they decided to create a small foundation in Garrett O'Connell's name, aimed at funding treatments, shelters, and opportunities for those who, like his son at one time, found themselves adrift. Through donations and partnerships with other social projects, they intended to expand that seed of generosity and nurture it in various directions. Both Rosalind and the son would oversee the foundation, sharing their stories to show people that a simple act can resonate for decades. Months later, the nursing home proudly displayed a sign celebrating Garrett's memory, and in that space, smiles multiplied among new residents. The routine remained the same: meals, medical care, nurses rushing back and forth, but a different sparkle lingered in the walls. Anyone passing through at certain late afternoons would hear soft laughter echoing through the hallways and might swear they saw the shadow of an elderly man smiling beside Rosalind. It was just the sunset's light reflecting on the window, but for all who witnessed that legacy, it was living proof that love and generosity survived the passage of time. After all, in that place where everything seemed forgotten, an anonymous act had turned into unbreakable bonds, transforming lives forever. In the end, Garrett's story reminds us of the incredible ripple effect of kindness. A single quiet act of generosity not only saved lives, but also bridged generations, healed wounds, and left an everlasting legacy. It teaches us that even in our smallest actions, we hold the power to create a profound impact on others. Life may not always give us second chances, but it offers opportunities to transform regret into reconciliation and loss into legacy. What about you? Is there a kindness you've experienced or given that changed someone's life? And how did this story resonate with you? Share your thoughts below. We'd love to hear them. If you enjoyed this story, please support the channel by subscribing and clicking the notification bell so you don't miss future videos. Don't forget to like this video, leave a comment with your reflections, and share it with someone who might need this message of hope. And before you go, check out the next inspiring story by clicking the card on your screen. Thank you so much for being part of this journey with us. See you in the next one.